welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something really small, but actually fascinating. Microsnails.
Tiny creatures, big discovery.
Exactly. We've got this huge, like 300-page article from ZooKeys. It details 46 new species discovered over in Southeast Asia.
46? That's quite a number.
It really is. But we're zooming in on one in particular. They're calling it the Picasso snail.
Ah, yes, the one with the rather distinctive shell.
Right. So our mission today, really, is to figure out why this tiny Cubist snail and all its newly found relatives actually matter. What do they tell us?
Well, it certainly makes you pause, doesn't it? You think of Southeast Asia and, well, parts are heavily explored, but still. An international team led by Vukašin Gojina, a PhD student from Serbia, and his Hungarian advisor Barnapol Gurgely. They go out, they survey, and boom, 46 species nobody knew about. It just shows.
It shows how much is still out there.
Precisely, how much biodiversity is still undocumented,
Right.
and crucially, how urgent it is to look before it's too late for some of them.
Okay, so let's picture the scene. These malacologist snail experts are out in Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos.
Thailand, Vietnam.
Yeah, sifting through leaf litter, looking under rocks, I imagine. And they find this one shell.
Yeah.
And it's just different.
It really stands out. Most snail shells, they have that smooth spiral curve.
Right, the classic swirl.
But Anauchen Picasso, that's its scientific name. It has these sharp angles. The whorls are almost rectangular.
Rectangular. On a snail.
Yeah. The researchers themselves called it a Cubist interpretation of a typical snail shell, hence the Picasso name, of course.
That makes sense. And it's tiny, right? Like, how small are we talking?
Very small. About 3 millimeters across.
Wow. 3 millimeters. But it sounds like there's a lot packed into that tiny shell.
Yeah.
The article mentions tooth-like barriers
Yeah.
inside the opening.
Yes, the aperture barriers. And fascinating. Think of them as tiny defenses.
Like keeping predators out, little spiky bits.
Exactly. Probably makes it much harder for something like a small beetle larva or another predator to, get inside.
Okay, interesting. And then there was something even weirder. Some shells pointing up or down.
That's right. Some of the other new species described have these apertures, the openings, that are oriented either upwards or downwards relative to how the snail crawls.
So wait, they carry their shells upside down or pointing straight up.
Effectively, yes. It seems incredibly awkward, but it must serve some purpose. Maybe it helps them navigate specific surfaces, or perhaps it's another anti-predator strategy.
Huh. Why?
It really highlights the specialization. These features, the barriers, the shell orientation, they seem minor, but they're key identifiers for telling these species apart. Incredible diversity in miniature.
Okay, here's the part that really caught my eye, and it's a bit, well, concerning.
Ah, you mean the museum specimens?
Yeah. Some of these new species weren't actually found on these recent trips. They were already sitting in a collection, right? At the Florida Museum of Natural History.
That's correct. Specimens collected back in the 1980s, in some cases, just rediscovered now, essentially.
Which leads to the obvious kind of worrying question. What happened to the places they were originally collected from decades ago?
That is the million-dollar question. And given that many of these snails are locally endemic...
Meaning they only live in one very specific small area?
Exactly. Hyper-local.
Yeah.
If that specific patch of forest or that particular limestone outcrop is gone...
Then the whole species could be gone before we even officially knew it existed.
It's a strong possibility. In some cases, the researchers are fairly certain the original habitats have been destroyed. Deforestation and especially limestone quarrying.
Limestone. Because snails need calcium for their shells.
Precisely. Limestone habitats are biodiversity hotspots for land snails in Southeast Asia, but they're also prime targets for quarrying for cement and construction. It's a huge threat.
So this Picasso snail, this tiny angular marvel, it's not just a cool discovery, it's also a bit of a warning sign.
I think that's a fair way to put it. It represents both the wonders we're still finding and the threats that might be erasing wonders before we even get a chance to see them.
Let's zoom out then. What's the big takeaway here?
Well, firstly, it drives home just how much biodiversity is still out there undiscovered. Even in relatively well-studied regions, 46 species in one paper.
Yeah.
And secondly, it's a stark reminder of the pace of habitat loss, particularly in biodiversity hotspots like Southeast Asia. These tiny snails, being so localized, are incredibly vulnerable. Their discovery, especially the rediscovery of those older specimens, highlights that we might be losing species faster than we can find them.
So, wrapping this up, this journey into the world of a, let's face it, incredibly small snail with a very cool shell. It's shown its amazing biodiversity. But it also paints a pretty sobering picture about habitat destruction.
It really does. These tiny lives reflect huge challenges.
A tiny cubist snail is a symbol for potentially lost worlds.
And that really leaves a final thought for you, listening. How many other unseen wonders like these snails might be disappearing right now, unnoticed? And what roles, maybe vital roles we don't even understand yet, do these seemingly insignificant creatures play in the grand scheme of things? It's something to really ponder, isn't it? The urgency to explore, understand, and ultimately protect what we have, no matter how small.